You know, once in a while we get to take you behind the scenes of a really special place. And behind me is the Westmead Mansion, which is the sister house to the Belmead Mansion. You may have driven by this house on occasion. It's right at the Highway 70-100 split on the Highway 70 side. And not only is this the sister house, but this house was actually built by one of the two sisters of the Harding family who owned the Belmead Mansion. This house was constructed in the 1880s for just under $13,000, believe it or not. And a few years ago, it was refurbished, and we're about to meet the landscape architect who was in charge of helping bring the grounds up to date for a house that they really wanted to preserve and keep very much like it was originally, but needed a modern landscape for. Well, Todd, thanks for joining us today. Tell me a little bit about this property and how long ago you helped sort of do some of this refurbishing.
Probably about 12 years ago, the owners had purchased the property. There had only been 3 owners in the history of the property, and it was quite overgrown at the time. And so we really were taking it back, clearing it out to see what was left, if anything.
Right.
Doing historical research and that type of thing.
Areas like this, obviously this magnolia was probably
That was existing, and a lot of wonderful trees.
Right.
Elms
so
and oaks
you had kind of overstory,
absolutely,
but not a lot of understory. Mm-hmm. So hydrangeas and things like that, were all of those added?
They were favorites of the owner.
Right. And also, I mean, even though this landscape wasn't necessarily taken from a historic perspective, these are still plants that would have probably been
could have been used, maybe not in that same way, but
right,
yes, used
could
on
have
the
been used during that time. So one of the things that I notice as we walk around this property is the important attention to detail. Tell us a little bit about your vision for some of the details we see around the property.
We always try to take cues from the architecture, and this one being in the 1880s did have a lot of unique detail to it. And we reworked the crestwork, the ironwork on the roof, and also did historically accurate fencing around the property that's all hand wrought.
Right, and then that kind of paired with your modern take on the landscape, we see a lot of architectural detail even in the plantings. Lots of boxwood hedges.
Absolutely, it gives structure and sort of organizes the spaces and ties in again with the architectural style.
And even the patio that we're standing on, the sidewalk that's over near us, it has a real architectural value to it. And I'm assuming that that was by plan.
Yeah, that actually was requested by the owner. So we try to work with their program as much as possible, as long as it works with the style again.
Sure. Well, one of the things I really want to look at is this other little outbuilding that's out here. So let's take a walk this way.
Okay. It was the original historic dairy for the property, and it was converted to a guest house. But if you visit the Belmead Mansion, you can see one that's almost identical with a lower level, a middle level, and an upper level.
Okay. And I assume that most of this landscaping was not here. This is probably
right. It was all done. There was no smaller shrubbery or flowers, any of that. Nothing was left.
Just large trees and and lawn and not much understory. So here we have Annabelle hydrangea, a little different than the one we saw earlier, and a popular plant for everybody.
Selection of one of our native plants.
Right. And tell me about some of the other plants that are in the shade garden around this building.
Again, we try to incorporate things that'll give interest throughout the year. So we've got an evergreen base with some laurels, boxwoods, ground cover such as this winter creeper, and other places we used vinca. And then in the shadier areas for flowering, we used hellebores or Lynchon rose, also hardy begonias and ferns, hostas.
Sure. Well, it all just really kind of flows and ties together really nicely. And
thank
it's
you.
A really pretty garden and a nice little quiet sort of shady
very serene
respite, especially around what used to be the dairy barn and is now the guest house.
Right.
So visitors having company have a nice little place to come out and sit. Over here on the side of the residence, there's a garden bed that features a mass planting of Rudbeckia, or Black-Eyed Susan. Such a dependable perennial here with a long bloom time, generally July through September. This easy care plant makes a great foundation for a garden bed. And when landscaping, don't overlook the possibility of keeping it simple and stately by choosing shrubs and ground covers that aren't big on bloom. Different shades of green and different textures can provide a soothing little vignette, and they can play a background role for the showy parts of the yard. I would imagine that one of the challenges here was to help screen this property from all of the neighboring ones. And
we really wanted to create privacy for the estate, and that was one of the first things we did, was created perimeter plantings, different mixtures of trees. We didn't want anything too formal, really.
Right.
So it would blend in with the surroundings.
Looked like maybe it's been here for a while.
Right.
And I can see just standing here and looking around the back that you have things like dogwoods and magnolias and pines.
We did a mixture of a lot of natives, some southern things. It was quite rocky, so we used some cedar trees, that type of thing. Also incorporated some fruit trees, apple trees, and orchard plants.
Even if you don't live on a large 7-acre property like this one is, there are a lot of things that you can take home with you about a property like this that you can adapt to a smaller landscape. Things like structure.
Certainly, the way plants are arranged, the little groupings, just putting elements in the garden that are architectural.
Sure. And even the way maybe some of the patios are laid out or the sidewalks are laid out. You know, getting from point A to point B. It's not any different on a small property than it is on a large property.
It's just a shorter distance. To detail, even, like we talked about.
Right. And it really is the details that make the garden. Todd, thanks so much for giving us this grand tour of a beautiful place, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
For inspiring garden tours, growing tips, and garden projects, visit our website at volunteergardener.org or on YouTube at the Volunteer Gardener channel, and like us on Facebook.